I never thought I would become the kind of man who checks his own home like a stranger looking for proof. For weeks, something had felt off. It started small late. Night texts she would turn her phone away from me to read, sudden trips to the store that took twice as long. A new perfume she claimed was just something different. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we had built years together. You don't just throw that away over a gut feeling. But the gut feeling wouldn't leave. That evening, the air in the house felt wrong the moment I stepped through the front door. It was quiet, in a way that wasn't peaceful, more like the silence before a storm. Her car was in the driveway. The living room lights were off, but I could see a faint glow from our bedroom down the hall. I remember my heart starting to pound, not from anger yet, but from dread. A heavy, suffocating dread. I walked slowly, each step louder than the last on the hardwood floor. I could hear something whispers, a nervous laugh that didn't belong to me. My stomach dropped. In that instant, every suspicion, every ignored sign, lined up perfectly in my mind. I didn't want to believe it. I prayed I was wrong. I hoped I would open that door and find some harmless explanation. But when I pushed the bedroom door open, the truth hit me harder than any punch ever could. There she was, my wife, frozen in shock, tangled in the sheets with another man. For a split second, nobody moved. Time seemed to slow down. Her eyes widened, not with guilt at first, but with fear of being caught. His expression shifted from confusion to terror as he realized who I was. My ears rang. I couldn't hear what she was saying, though her lips were moving fast. Apologies, excuses, my name repeated over and over, but the only thing I could focus on was the betrayal in front of me. The woman who once promised loyalty, who stood beside me and vowed forever, now looked like a stranger. The pain wasn't loud. It was cold, sharp. It crawled up my spine and wrapped around my chest. I felt humiliated, replaced, made a fool of in my own home. Every memory we shared replayed in my mind like it was mocking me. Anniversaries, late night conversations, plans for the future. All of it felt fake in that moment. I didn't yell at first. I didn't swing or scream. I just stood there, staring at the scene that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The discovery wasn't just about catching her cheating. It was the death of trust, the collapse of the life I believed we were building together. And in that silence, something inside me changed forever. The silence didn't last long. As the shock began to fade, the reality of what I was seeing ignited something fierce inside me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline rushing through my veins. She kept talking, her voice cracking as she scrambled to explain, but her words blurred together into meaningless noise. The other man tried to gather his clothes in a panic, his movements clumsy and desperate, as if he believed that getting dressed would somehow erase what had just happened. "Get out," I said at first, my voice low and controlled. It surprised even me. It didn't sound like shouting. It sounded colder than that, measured, dangerous. He looked at her, not at me, like he was waiting for instructions. That alone made my blood boil. This was my house, my marriage, and he was standing there, waiting for her to tell him what to do. I said, "Get out." I repeated, stepping further into the room. She jumped off the bed, trying to put herself between us, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying it wasn't what it looked like. The oldest lie in the world, spoken in the most obvious moment. I didn't push her aside, but I didn't step back either. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against the walls. The man finally found his voice. "Hey, let's just calm down," he muttered, holding his hands up slightly, as if that would make everything better. He tried to sound reasonable, but I could hear the tremor underneath. He wasn't calm. He was calculating. Looking for an exit, "You don't get to tell me to calm down," I replied, my jaw tight. "You don't get to say anything in my house." The confrontation wasn't loud at first. It was sharp and precise. Every word carried weight. My wife kept pleading, grabbing at my arm, telling me we could talk about this. Talk, as if there was a conversation that could undo what I had just seen. I stepped closer to him, and he stepped back instinctively. That was when the power shift became undeniable. Minutes ago, he had felt bold enough to lie in my bed. Now he couldn't even hold eye contact. His confidence drained from his face, replaced by naked fear. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I asked him directly, not her, him. He swallowed hard and shook his head, but he didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was written all over him. The air felt electric, like one wrong move could ignite everything. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore, just reacting, driven by a mixture of rage and humiliation. My wife's sobs grew louder, but they sounded distant, like background noise to the storm building in my chest. This wasn't just an argument, it was a collision, a breaking point where lies met reality. And in that small bedroom, with clothes scattered and trust shattered, the confrontation reached a boiling edge. Nothing could go back to normal after this. The line had been crossed, and we were all standing on the wrong side of it. The moment stretched thin, like a wire pulled too tight. He was still backing away, step by step, until his legs hit the edge of the dresser. I could see it clearly now. The confidence he must have walked in with was completely gone. Whatever fantasy he had built in his head about sneaking around in another man's house had evaporated. Now he was just a scared man standing where he didn't belong. My wife kept crying, saying my name over and over, telling me to think, to breathe, to stop. But something had shifted inside me. It wasn't blind rage anymore. It was something colder, controlled. Focused, I turned and walked out of the bedroom without another word. For a second, they probably thought I was leaving. Maybe they thought I had given up, but I walked straight down the hall to the storage cabinet near the entrance, the one place in the house I rarely touched anymore. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal of my rifle. I didn't rush. I didn't slam anything. I simply lifted it and walked back. When I stepped into the doorway again, the room changed instantly. He saw it first. His eyes locked onto the rifle, and the color drained from his face so fast it was almost unreal. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The fear that had been simmering inside him exploded into full panic. He raised both hands immediately, like instinct had taken over. "Whoa, wait, listen," he stammered, his voice cracking. My wife gasped, rushing toward me, grabbing at my arm. "Don't do this, please don't do this," she cried. But I hadn't aimed it. I hadn't even lifted it beyond holding it at my side. The power wasn't in pointing it. The power was in the fact that I could. The shift was absolute. Just minutes ago, he had been bold enough to betray me in my own home. Now, he looked like a cornered animal. His knees seemed unsteady. His breathing became loud and uneven. I could see his chest rising and falling rapidly, like he couldn't get enough air. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said slowly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "But you're going to remember this moment for the rest of your life." That was when it happened. His fear wasn't controlled anymore. It wasn't calculated. It was primal. A dark stain began to spread down his leg, unmistakable and humiliating. The smell followed seconds later. The room went silent. Even my wife stopped crying for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. The man who had felt brave enough to risk everything now couldn't even control himself. His dominance, his arrogance, whatever he thought he had, it was gone. He looked at me with pleading eyes, completely broken by the weight of his own terror. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I didn't need to fire a single shot. I didn't need to scream or strike him. The rifle wasn't about violence. It was about control, and the control had returned to me. The moment his body betrayed him, the humiliation was complete. He had walked into my home with arrogance, convinced that he could take what wasn't his and get away with it. Every movement he had made in my house before that, the confident smirk, the way he looked at my wife, the casual air he carried, had all been a performance. And now, in an instant, that performance was stripped away. His legs wobbled as he tried to regain some shred of dignity, but it was gone. Every eye in the room, mine and hers, was on him, witnessing the collapse of the facade he had spent months building. I watched him struggle, my hands still gripping the rifle loosely, but without needing to raise it. The sight of him, reduced to pure panic and shame, brought a strange clarity to my thoughts. It wasn't about revenge in the violent sense, at least not yet. This was about justice in the rawest, simplest form. He had dared to disrespect me, my marriage, my home. And now the universe, or at least this room, was correcting that imbalance. My wife's sobs had quieted into whimpers, and I could feel her eyes darting between us. There was fear there, but also an odd relief. She saw what I saw. The man she had thought would intimidate or manipulate me was powerless. His pride had been obliterated in front of both of us. He was a man stripped to the core of his ego, left with nothing but the realization that he had miscalculated entirely. He attempted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but his voice cracked with every word. The sentences tumbled out in fragments, incomprehensible and desperate. He tried to step back, as if the distance would somehow restore his dignity, but the room seemed to shrink around him. His every attempt to regain composure only highlighted his complete defeat. He couldn't hide, he couldn't charm, he couldn't threaten. In that moment he was entirely at my mercy, and everyone could see it. The raw humiliation of the act, the sheer panic that had caused him to lose control of his own body, was the most potent weapon in this confrontation. It delivered a message far clearer than anger or violence ever could. He had crossed a line, and the consequences were immediate and undeniable. There was no escape from the shame, no denial that could rewrite what had just happened. His dominance, which he had carried like a shield into my house, had turned to ashes in the space of a single, shattering moment. Even as I maintained my calm, the power in the room had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer just the husband who had caught his wife cheating. I was the force that exposed him for exactly what he was: weak, afraid, and utterly powerless. Every glance he threw toward me carried a silent plea. Every quiver of his body screamed apology. Every hesitation in his movement reinforced the truth. The humiliation wasn't something I needed to inflict actively. It was self-generated, a natural consequence of his own cowardice and betrayal. And in watching it unfold, I realized the profound satisfaction that came not from rage, but from seeing the balance restored. He had entered my life with audacity, but he would leave with nothing but the memory of his own disgrace. Every moment of that scene, the fear, the loss of control, the utter collapse of his bravado, etched into my mind a lesson about respect, consequence, and the undeniable power of reclaiming one's authority in a moment when it truly matters. After the immediate confrontation ended, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself had absorbed the tension and betrayal. My wife sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, her face streaked with tears. She didn't know whether to look at me or away from me. And I understood her confusion. She had crossed a line, and now she was witnessing the consequences of her choices. But the story wasn't over. The moment had changed everything, and it was clear that this was no longer just a personal matter. It was a lesson in justice, accountability, and emotional revenge. The lover, still slumped against the dresser, avoided my gaze entirely. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The weight of humiliation had completely immobilized him. Every instinct he had once used to manipulate or charm had failed him, leaving only fear. That fear wasn't just about the rifle I held or the momentary power I exhibited. It was about the undeniable reality that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. In that room he understood his place. He had trespassed not only physically but morally, and now he faced the reckoning. I felt a cold clarity settle in. Anger was still there, but it was refined now into something more precise. This was about sending a message, not only to him but to everyone involved. The confrontation had exposed the truth, and the consequences had been immediate. Humiliation, fear, and the collapse of his false confidence had done more than words ever could. He had learned his lesson the hard way, and the lesson would stick. The idea of revenge wasn't about violence. It was about control, about reclaiming authority over a situation that had been violated. With each passing moment, I realized that revenge could be both quiet and devastating. It didn't need to be loud or messy. It simply needed to leave an imprint that could not be ignored. The lover's panic, the look of complete powerlessness in his eyes, the knowledge that he had been completely outmatched, it all served as proof that actions have consequences. Meanwhile, my wife, witnessing the absolute shift in dynamics, was confronted with the gravity of her choices. Tears, apologies, and explanations were meaningless in the face of such undeniable truth. The emotional weight of the situation was already reshaping the hierarchy in our household. It was a lesson in pride and accountability, in control and consequence. The encounter wasn't just about catching a betrayal. It was about reclaiming my own authority, demonstrating that violations of trust have tangible, undeniable repercussions. This was the kind of revenge that didn't rely on anger or destruction. It relied on exposing truth and letting the natural consequences of fear, humiliation, and accountability speak for themselves. In the quiet aftermath, as he finally slinked out of the house, every step careful and humiliated, I understood the deeper truth. Revenge isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's about the power shift, the psychological domination, and the certainty that betrayal has real consequences. In this case, it wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoring balance, asserting authority, and making it clear that actions have consequences far beyond what anyone might anticipate. And in that room, as silence settled back in, the message had been delivered perfectly, leaving no room for doubt, denial, or defiance.